Hey, Aethon readers. John Chambers here, and I have some amazing releases this week. Less than normal, but some amazing quality releases. We have Carter J. Thompson here with us, who's going to be talking about his book coming up shortly, so be ready with some questions for him about that. But today we're going to start with Retzi Bruno and Jamie Castle. They always put out some amazing stuff. But if you look at some of the reviews that are coming out about this short story in science fiction, they are absolutely incredible. We have people commenting, this is the perfect short story. You just go to Amazon and just look at the top ones. That's like, you can normally tell when someone's either just being, nice, or when someone is like truly invested. And this one is really rocking. Also, it is included in Audible Plus. So if you have an Audible Plus membership, just pick it up, give it a listen this week. Because that's one of the first things I plan to do when I get off of this announcement video. So The Long Vigil, a short story by Retzi Bruno and Jamie Castle. Go take a look. Here's a description real quick. After 25 years serving as the human monitor of the interstellar ark, Hermes, Orion is scheduled to be placed back into hibernation with the other crew members. Knowing he'll die there and be replaced before the ship's voyage is over, he decides that he can't accept that fate. Whatever it takes, Orion will escape Hermes and see what's beyond, even if it means defying the regulations of his only friend, the ship-wide artificial intelligence known as Dan. So it seems like this is going to be another hit for Rhett and Jamie, which they keep seeming to put out recently. So go take a look. Not out today, but out on the 28th, we have Blessed Time 2, Coda, by Cale Plaman. He's actually going to join us next week. And I was going to read his little blurb, but I actually read part 1, and I thought it was incredible. Genuinely one of my favorites put out by Aethon, especially in the lit RPG genre. That he has some genuinely unique time travel elements, sort of a repeat cycle. And a lot of people do that, and sometimes they don't pull it off well, but genuinely unique. And I enjoyed every time he pulled the trigger to, loop time. And it was also a skill system that affected the story but didn't overshadow the plot. And there was solid motivations for the main character. So what can I say other than I'm a fan? So next week, I'm going to ask him about some of his advice when it comes to solid character motivations. You always knew why the character was doing what he was doing. So that is my little stake for this book series. Pick up part 1. Part 2 is released the 28th, this Thursday, and be ready for some questions for him next week. So now we have the man of the hour. We have Carter J. Thompson joining us. Hey, Carter, how are you doing?
Good. How about you?
And you have a very exciting release today. So if you're going to check it out today in your new series, Against the Night, Book 1, Worthless. So give us a scoop. Tell us about Worthless.
I guess the title gives a bit of it, Against the Night. Everything recently is something the night. So in this case, the tagline is the world ended, the night killed it. So post-apocalyptic, something really bad happened. I'm not going to give spoilers as to what it is, but it basically left humanity walled in one small city. Well, it's a pretty big city technically, but within one city. And in that city is our main character, X. X has pretty much no advantages, including only a one-letter name. And so he's poor, he's illiterate, he's unemployed. He gets by risking his life outside the wall to try to scavenge. But life inside the walls, as you know, you stuff a bunch of humanity together, things don't go so well. Something happens inside the wall, and he's left with the choice of deal with it there or take the risk outside the walls with the night that wiped out humanity and try to survive out there. And I mean, based on the cover, you can probably take a guess as to which choice he makes without getting into spoilers. But then it sort of goes on from there.
Yeah. Now, we were talking a little bit beforehand, and there's quite a bit of suspense in this book, but you did not set it out to be in the horror genre, but it kind of fits a little bit. And right in time for Halloween. You were, I believe you said this is post-apocalypse fantasy setting, but your suspense kind of fell in there. What happened there?
Well, I mean, originally when I was starting, I was going to do a middle grade rom-com, but it didn't quite work out that way. So when I started conceptualizing the story, I started with the last scene first. So how the last chapter before the epilogue ends was how I knew the story had to go. And then I sort of filled in some of the other components along the way. And the more I went into it, kind of the darker it got, no pun intended, considering it's a book about night. But it's definitely post-apocalyptic. Bad stuff happened. Bad stuff happens in the book. X does not have an easy go of it. Nor do a lot of the other characters. It's a rough world. So with regards to that, there's definitely a bit of psychological horror. There's definitely some suspense, trying to build tense scenes so that the reader feels involved in what's happening. And a quick shout out to Joe Hempel, the guy who did the audio narration. I've been listening to it today. He did a really good job on it. So if you see Joe, give him a high five for me. He did a really good job. There's a bit of body horror because there's some violence. Well, okay, there's a fair bit of violence and action. So, I would say there's definitely horror elements, but it's also a bit of a post-apocalyptic adventure fantasy.
Yeah, and I think most writers would agree suspense is difficult to pull off well. So, do you have any advice for writers such as myself, or aspiring writers such as myself? What makes a good suspense? What is it? What's kind of the keys there?
So I would say what makes good suspense, and this is just my personal opinion, are sort of the same 2 or 3 things that will make a good scene in any story type. So you're going to have voice, setting, and details. So I think that trying to craft a perfect scene in the first chapter is really tough because your reader's not going to be familiar with your book or the voice of the character, the main character or the POV that you're working with. So giving them a little bit of time to settle into the voice is really important, especially if you have a distinct voice in your story. So like X, he's a little bit stubborn, a little bit happy-go-lucky, considering everything that's happened to him, and that voice is important. So getting one, setting up the voice. 2 is of course the setting, getting people familiar with where you are and what you're doing, and it's kind of what the expectation is going to be. Again, setting it up in the first chapter is really tough, and I applaud folks who can do that in chapter 1. I'm not one of those folks, but giving time to sort of build to it. And then of course 3 is, I guess 2, setting pacing is also really important, but I'll jump into 3 with the details, especially for something like horror or action, giving the reader details they can connect to. So if you're talking about scents, you don't want to say X smelled something horrible. Well, what does horrible mean? Give the reader something that they can connect to so that their senses, whether they want to or not, are either smelling it or hearing it or feeling it, bringing them deeper into the point of view, connecting them more to the story, and then keeping it moving on. And I guess that sort of goes back to pacing as well, where it's important to write your sentences the length appropriate to what's happening. Like short sentences are good for action. Longer sentences are good for like a narration or a description or something that you really need to feel the length of the scene.
I feel like I hijacked these interviews to get many coaching sessions with all the amazing writers at Aethon. So I should be an expert by this time next year. So
I'll ask you next time.
Thanks. But you said something that kind of struck something in my head. It was reading is visual.
Yeah.
You said smelled something horrible. It's like if you were describing something, if you just put sort of a generic term versus more details to it, the reader isn't actually experiencing the moment like you're supposed to. So, yeah. So thank you for those tips. I always like to ask this: do you write to music? Do you listen to music while you're writing?
Absolutely. But I can't listen to new music. I have to listen to music that I've been listening to for a long time because I use it slightly more as background noise than anything else. And if I've got new music, then I'm singing along and nobody wants to hear me sing, including my wife. So it's got to be music I'm really familiar with. So I already know the lyrics and I don't need to think about it.
I agree with that. Although I don't do normally music with lyrics, I normally just play something I would normally put as a background to Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. But yeah, I agree. If I'm listening to something new, I like get distracted. I'm like, this is good, or you know what, I don't like this, and so it has to be an old, trusted playlist.
Mm-hmm.
So
my playlist really dates me. Really dates me.
Yeah. So you've got all 3 books written with release dates. So you're done, and people that end up being a fan of this can look forward shortly to the next couple. So what's next after Against the Night?
That's a good question. So Worthless, book 1 of the Against the Night series, I wrote that a couple of years ago. It was the second novel that I've written, not including something really bad that we're just not going to talk about and pretend it doesn't exist. But it was the second real novel that I wrote and edited. I didn't start on to books 2 and 3 until I started talking to Aethon. And then after that, I wrote books 2 and 3. So book 2 actually only took me about a month to write. So I got through it really, really quick. The third one alone took me a little bit longer to nail the landing, so to speak. And then I've written
book versus how do you finish 3 books? So I can see the difficulties.
Yeah, everybody wants something, and I'm one of those people who wants something from an ending. And is the ending enough? I think it is. My beta readers were really good, and they told me, "No, Carter, this ending sucks. Get back to work on it."
I did that.
Yeah. So I've written a couple other books in between those, and then another one after. And I guess it's kind of figuring out what I'm going to do with those. The Worthless series, like we were talking about, is that sort of post-apocalyptic fantasy. The other stuff I wrote was mostly fantasy and a couple of, we'll call them science fantasy. Like you were saying, and I saw there was a comment with horror movies. When I write, when I read, I aim to be as cinematic as possible, so that in case Netflix is listening, there's a couple of really good books out there that they can bring on board. And some of the other books are also really cinematic. Well, I like to think that they're somewhat cinematic and action oriented. So I'm going to figure out what to do with those, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. The comment you're referring to, we got Christopher. Hey, Chris. I like horror movies, and mixing with apocalyptic books always will interest me. Now, this is, I think, to a recent success, A Silent Place.
A Quiet Place.
Now, A Quiet Place, yeah. I walked out of A Quiet Place. I don't do well with horror normally, but I could normally get through the movie and be entertained and genuinely enjoy it. But man, I have to tell you the story. I walked out because my son was the same age as the little boy at the beginning of the movie. So I could see, I think there's people that get so into their movies that they're really experiencing themselves. And then there's people that kind of sit back, analyze the story, enjoy the story and the craft and the art, versus the people who, I just am one of those that just jumped so far in. Could not stop imagining my own son dying. I couldn't get that out of my head. So I was just sat there for like 10 minutes after that scene. And as like my brother-in-laws and stuff were there, and I was just like, I just got to go. I got up and left. But they went to that place because they know that's where the emotion lives. And so, yeah.
One of my beta readers read one of my other works recently, and she sent me a comment saying, "You really like to do horrible things to your characters, don't you?" Yes, I do horrible things to some of the characters, but there are some things that even I can't do, because similar to that, while I don't have kids, I really understand that connection. And while it's a good way to do what we were talking about before, making that connection and make the reader or the watcher feel, because they can imagine it happening to them, there's some stuff I can't bring myself to do it.
Yeah, there's some, I mean, and I think that's, you look at the different genres and the expectation. If you want to be scared out the living daylights, you go for a true horror. If you want to experience existentialism at that level of into the world post-apocalypse. So, but it's as writers, what kind of questions are you trying to put in your author? People are like, I don't like preachy people. I was like, if you write a book, you are preaching. You've got your values in there somewhere. You've got something in there. You've got a sense of right and wrong. And as a culture, an American culture, we genuinely normally fall on the same page of murdering people is wrong. So if there's someone in need, we help them. So in the post-apocalypse, it's like we lose these values and who we are, but which ones should remain? Which one is the hero trying to bring back? I think is a question we often see in post-apocalypse. I'm getting all analytical on the genres here, but it's a good writer is going to bring forth those values, those questions, and the hero's values aligning with the reader's values is what makes a hero. So yeah.
Though it can be tough, because we do have to also write villains, and villains aren't necessarily going to have those views, and those are not necessarily the view of the author. But as soon as you put them in, then it becomes the question of, well, where does this go? Where does it stand?
The greater the evil that the hero has to stand against, the greater the cause of the hero, the more, I guess, heroic, more Superman style you are. So, and that's the other side of the thing. I mean, people go on, it's like, what is it to be an actor? It's to put on something that you are not from their viewpoint and get a convincing writing. So as an author there, writing your villain, you are acting more than ever because you are not this person. And if you're doing a good job, you've made a convincing, horrible villain. Me and another friend were just talking the other day about what are the best villains in recent times, and I'm not going to go into it because we'll start a whole new horrible debate.
But now I'm curious.
So it was people say that a lot of people are going on about Thanos. Honestly, in the first, in the Avengers Endgame, and it was the first movie versus the second movie. He was such a different villain because he hadn't been through the experience of, I guess, the experiences of the first. So it's like the first version of Thanos had been through so much more experience, and so he was relatable. He was like, they made it to where you were almost feeling bad for him there at the end because he actually suffered for his own cause, versus the second one he didn't, and so he was more basic villain. And so it's just punch him in the face, we're fine, blow him up, that's fine. First Thanos is like, I don't know how I like the way I don't think I like the way I'm feeling. How I'm sympathizing, but if you're gonna stay on the Marvel track, I mean, Loki, that's sort of his whole. And it's true. You make a villain relatable, and he's so much harder to hate. And there's that whole adage: every villain is the hero of their own story. Mm-hmm. And if you can bring that to the page, then you can make or to a movie screen, then you can make for a great character. If you can't do that, in my opinion, then you're not going to have somebody who stands out as a good villain. Yeah. And the all the complaints against Marvel up to that movie was all the throwaway villains. Your hero is only as good as the villain they're fighting, is interesting. But they did a great job on quite a few of their properties, even without the villain, because it was the stories of the heroes and then the companionship, them coming together. Those were the moments we're looking for. A lot of authors have done that really well. I'd say, I read Shirley, and I was like, the most interesting is when the party comes together. Yeah, and it's like Shirley's main character is not not the only real, he himself as a character is not that interesting without his interactions with the party members and the people. And that's what kind of jumped me into the series, is as soon as he meets that party and as soon as those interactions happen. And that's, anyway, we could sit here talking for days, but
it's a great series.
Yeah, it is. Everyone check out Against the Night, Book 1, Worthless, out today. And as Gar was saying, the audiobook went really well. Who was it that narrated?
Joe Hempel. At least I'm hoping I'm pronouncing
his
his
name
name
correctly. Have all this
correctly.
information at hand, but you know, and Joe did a great job. And if you want something that has a bit of suspense to it going into the Halloween season, take a look.
Costume ideas.
Christopher says he's already a third of the way through it, so he's
Thanks, Christopher.
He's on it. You're gonna have a review soon. So
Okay, no spoilers.
Good job.
What happens?
Yeah. It sounds like this was a journey for you, and good work. Looking forward to reading it myself, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your insight
having me,
and sharing with other authors some tips, especially this guy right here. All right, thanks, Aethon watchers, for tuning in, and we'll see you in the review section for Worthless. So.